All right, let's get started. So, Dawn's going to watch the waiting room in case we got anybody else joining us. And let's just take a deep breath and just release that. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to play a song because, the series of the class is Lost in Translation, and Shannon is about to do some music, talk about music and how the translation may get misinterpreted. And I just love this song, and it's the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. So if you want to just relax, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and tell me if you can't hear this. Can you hear it? Shake a head.
Yes.
Okay. Close your eyes and let's just relax through this. So we just take a deep breath. As we may remain open to receiving what Spirit wants us to receive. And we know that all is well. In the right place, in the right time, in the right moment, right now, as we look forward to sharing with each other, learning and growing, and becoming ever more present with the one Spirit, God the good omnipotence. Amen.
Amen.
So let me stop that. So a little bit different version of what you might have heard in the past. That's the Aramaic version, and it just touches me. We hear the Lord's Prayer in many ways, and I just really relate to that one. So hope you enjoyed that. Right. Let's see where we're at. Gonna get this. There we go. There we go. Okay. So, last week, I just want to recap a little bit. We, did our introduction. We talked about what our goals were for the class. I'm going to show you the materials screen again. We talked about the heart agreements, just to remain open and receptive to ideas of others, allowing them to share how they're being changed or touched with the material. We talked about what is metaphysics, and we interpreted a Bible passage using the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary and Charles Fillmore's definitions. And we did that in a practice way where we're going to look at it again tonight, having the definition, the left column being the words, the nouns, the right, the definitions. All right. So what came up for you this past week? This is your time. I would like to hear if any of the material that we covered has resonated, any thoughts that might have come up along the way, and I don't know, just part of your journey. Would anybody like to share how the material might have affected them and what their thoughts were this past week? I have to volunteer somebody. No, no, really. Was someone starting to talk and I talked over you?
Sure. Yes, I was fascinated by it all last week.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, all right. I went and found the website that you talked about, Truth Unity,
Uh-huh.
and started to work with a verse. And then I thought, well, okay, which version of the Bible was Charles Fillmore using when he did that? Because the King James is a whole lot different than Revised Standard than
NIV.
any of the others. So so when I started looking, there were a lot of the nouns that I couldn't find.
Okay.
So at least not listed on the website.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask can you give me an example or can you tell me the verse you were working with?
Yeah, I was working with, I thought I'd get a jump on Maggie. So I started working with Adam and Eve.
Oh, yes. Interesting. He does have interpretations for Adam and Eve. Maybe it was, I know the website can be a little confusing with it looks like gibberish versus the book. So you didn't find Adam or Eve in there?
Oh, no.
Oh.
It was various words in the passage.
Yeah.
That were nouns, but didn't show up on the list that was on the website.
Yeah. So sometimes you can do a search, like just in the internet, metaphysical meeting of, let's just say, Adam if we didn't have it in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, and it will come up. I used a New International Version of the Bible myself. I don't know which Bible version or which Bible Charles used. I haven't, I know there's differences and nuances in the books and how they're written and then how they were translated. But were you able to work with the passage, or did you kind of just let it drop?
Oh, no, never let it drop.
Yay.
Yes, I was able to work with it.
Mhm.
It took a lot of digging, but I did get through it.
Good,
So,
good, good. Well, thank you. I'm glad you had an opportunity to explore. So I'm glad you did. I'm glad that that you explored that. So anybody else?
And so I just wanted to add, and sometimes in the Bible verses, there you'll come across words and nouns that they just mean what they mean. That not everything's going to have a metaphysical interpretation. That sometimes if the story is talking about an ox, it was just an ox in that story, and that's all it is in that story. Not every single thing is going to have a meaning beyond what you see. And then if you are interpreting it and it gets really relevant, that in your personal experience and in your life, you know what that ox means to me, then there's your metaphysical interpretation, because it's all about what is going on in your life at this period of time, at this state of consciousness. And if it represents something for you, somebody that, I was stubborn as an ox in my life, and that's what that's talking about when I was dealing with that person. It could have a very personal interpretation too, but not every single one is gonna be metaphysically defined. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Don, for sharing that. Absolutely.
And I just wanted to also add that since we are bringing this into our consciousness, I started looking at so many other things in my life other than just the Bible, and we don't realize that we metaphysically interpret that too. I mean, children's rhymes and Disney stories and all kinds of stuff. There's lessons about Aesop's fables, everything that a lot of things that you look at, you don't realize, but you're looking beyond the physical things that's happening in that story, and you're coming up with what it really means. A song you hear on the radio, they're not really talking about what they're talking about in those verses. They're talking about something bigger and something greater that, has relevance in my life. And there I just interpreted it metaphysically.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
I think part of it is just coming to the realization that like I was saying last week, you do it, like Don just said, you do it automatically. It's kind of there. It's just now there's like a label to it. With the Bible, we actually have resources where we can then say, here's the phrase, and this is the way I'm going to interpret it for me. But in life in general, we see things happen all the time and we go, there's a lesson there, but without realizing that that's what we're doing. And so we can even drop the big word metaphysical if you want and just go like we're just looking at it for the lessons, that there is a story and a lesson beyond the black and white words, beyond what we may have traditionally been taught about a particular passage or a story. So that's what we're doing. For me, when I was able to let go of some of my traditional youth interpretation of the Bible, it became very freeing. I mean, it's just like, it took the scariness out of it. It was like, so, and anybody else like to share?
I just think that, some of the images that are in the scripture, such as like the fig tree, I believe the fig tree is a symbol of life, of everlasting life. And it's, I have one in my yard and it's been putting off a beautiful fruit, and I've been enjoying the jam from it. But after, just listening to this, and as well as on Sunday, that was fabulous. That was a wonderful interpretation and a way to view. And it just, I'm starting to see all these things starting to come together, you know,
Good. Great.
some of the
Great.
meanings.
Great. Glad to hear that.
I feel like without going back in, I think I took this once before when you taught it,
Mm-hmm.
at least the first one. And I think it's fun to go, you know, to go back and see how you can do it yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
my big thing is when I started going to Unity after so many years of growing up Catholic, is I was just taken by, you know, I could hear it again. I think I just shut my ears for a while and didn't want to hear anything out of the Bible anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then when I started going to Unity, I was like, oh, that makes sense. I love this interpretation, you know, so
Mm-hmm.
knowing a little bit about the origins of that is cool.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
I would like to say something.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the different types of translation was a aha for me. Allows me to understand and respect when people do translate the Bible differently. So I
Mm-hmm.
can see where they're coming from. So I
Mm-hmm.
guess one of the reasons why I didn't read it was because people used it as a weapon more than anything. So understanding the difference in translation was really eye-opening for me.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for sharing. Yes, for me, it's like you say, if you meet somebody and they start talking about a particular way or they a certain passage or and it's like, you know, that's you can just smile and nod. Yeah, maybe I could translate it this way. You know, it's interesting. And they start going, I didn't think about that. So yeah, yeah. It's just it helps you understand where people are in their spiritual growth because they're growing spiritually. Anybody else? Okay, well, let's see. We're going to do a little bit more practicing tonight. Let me get back to the PowerPoint. And all right, thank you for sharing and reflecting on that. So, you know, basically this class was to, and is, the goal of the class is, you know, of course, to introduce you to the basics of metaphysics. If you are interested and you're a reader, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Heart-Centered Metaphysics by Paul Hasselbeck. This is a good course. It's actually one of the SEE, I believe it's an SEE course. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Don. There's Metaphysics 1 and Metaphysics 2 courses you can take for credit or not. But it's called Metaphysics, a deeper look at Unity's teaching, Paul Hasselbeck. And this will take you a little time to get through, but it's a good resource as well if you're interested in going even deeper into this. And we are going to do the process again tonight with a different passage, just to keep practicing, just to get used to how you can interpret these passages, because at a certain point, you won't need to write things down. You'll just go, oh, that's what it means to me. It's great to get the practice and to start writing it down, just to get the idea and how to break kind of things down. But eventually you'll just read something, go, I can see it. I can see the meaning. I can apply it to my life and I'm good with it. So like I said last week, that we used the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary and Revealing Word, both by Charles Fillmore. And we talked about the different ways, like Luce was just saying, the different ways that people interpret the Bible, see the Bible, their perception of it. So we don't need to go over these again, but just a reminder. It's literal, could be moral, exclusive, etc. And we said that metaphysics was the branch of philosophy that studies the reality beyond the physical realm. And I have a quote for you from Charles Fillmore that says, it is the systematic study of the science of being, capital B, that which transcends the physical. By pure metaphysics is meant a clear understanding of the realm of ideas and their expression. So now Charles can get a little heady if you've been around Unity for a while. Heady is, and sometimes you have to even interpret Charles's metaphysics metaphysically. What are you trying to say there, Charles? I take this and you can interpret or jump in here. Feel free to share, comment. The systematic study of the science of being God, the study of God that transcends the physical nature in the realm of ideas and their expression, like God as expressed through me. Like we talked about the creation story, or in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, the idea, and then the manifestation of it, the idea of earth and the manifestation of earth. Anybody want to comment about this particular definition, if you will?
Well, um, it's of a language that's about 120 years old or so.
Yes.
And so they spoke differently and used words differently than we do today.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's probably been dozens of shifts in that since that time period till 2021.
Mm-hmm. And so even in Unity, you will have people that interpret what the lesson is, what the meaning of it is, and it becomes an individual internal interpretation of the lesson, if you will, right? So we say Unity doesn't have a dogma. We're not going to tell you how to believe. This is, to me, that expression that I can read that sentence and take one meaning from it. You can take another meaning from it. And you're right in that, here we have 100-year-old language. So think of it when we're talking about the Bible, we're talking 2000, 1500 to close to 2000 years. So that's why you can't just say fact. It's a fact. No, there's been a lot of translations. There's been a lot of changes. So we just take it with what we have to work with. So, last week I showed you the world, the earth. I don't know if anybody had any shifts in thinking when you saw that. But this is, I like this pyramid too, because to me, this describes the level of self. And really, that's what we're working on, is ourselves. And that most people will start, most, and I'm not saying the people in this room, obviously. But when we go about our lives, we tend to think, okay, the divine and spiritual nature of some people being the smallest portion of what we think about in a day. Then people start to think about intuition. And we tend more to focus on mentally what happened today, emotionally, what was I thinking today, physically what happened today. And we tend to get into the physical becomes the most thing that we think about, right? And this is somebody that's, in that path and in that journey. And we live from a physical nature inward to divine, but not always the opposite. Are you with me? Okay. So if you hear people talking about, oh, physically I feel tired, emotionally I got mad, mentally I'm exhausted, you don't hear people go too much with intuitively, or my intuition today. You have those beings, but if you're in a general work environment, at a school, it's my intuition today that we're going to have a whatever. Spiritually, I think these kids are all doing a great job today. It's not something that's going to be out there, right? So we tend to think more on the physical, emotional, and mental realm. And really in Unity, I think we all, of course, as Unity students, you are physicians yourselves right now. You are Unity true students. That we tend to go the other way, right? So we're going to live in the divine spiritual intuition, and then the realization that really the mental, emotional, and physical part are more manifestations. So we have the universe, God, being, spiritual growth, our spiritual journey. We function in a world, hopefully, that comes from a nature of Christ consciousness. And then we react into the physical world through our mental, emotional, and physical states. So, we start maybe when we're younger, being more attached to the physical part of life. But as we get older, that tends to kind of change.
Mhm.
Any thoughts about that?
When I look at this and I tie it back to Charles Fillmore's definition of metaphysics, for me, the mental, emotional, physical, that's where these Bible passages and these stories are written down. That's where they exist.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're trying to do when you metaphysically interpret these passages is say they're limited in that little tiny, those, especially with the pyramid this way. The ability for you to tell a story or give a lesson or try to explain something is really limited in these little bottom triangles, but they're trying to represent something that's in those big blue and green stripes. So you've got this little physical area that you're trying to explain and define stuff that's really a lesson or a message from the divine or spiritual. So what we're trying to do with metaphysical interpretation is go, okay, with these messages we've got down here at the bottom, what are they really trying to tell us resides in the divine and the spiritual level for us? So we're trying to get from the bottom to the top of the pyramid. And the messages are limited down there, but they're pointing to something bigger at the top. And what are those bigger messages? And that's what we're trying to figure out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, Dawn, very much.
And I think that you look at the divine and the spiritual more as you get older, because the reality of your physical life, is lessened than when you were a young kid or a teenager. You thought, you're here forever. In the physical realm, you're not thinking about death or anything like that. But as you age, you realize that you start making plans with your retirement and other things, and so you are looking, and at least for me, more at the spiritual and the divine and element. And that's why I find this very fascinating, because it's a very freeing type of journey. And, that's.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else? So even just, kind of piggybacking on what Dawn was saying, a lot of, so if we look at the physical realm, we're looking at the physical actual Bible, right? You can see the physical actually Bible. And we move to the level of it creates some type of emotion in us. Again, some people connect, don't have any issues with it. Emotionally, some people are like, no, just because I shy away from it when I got in my teens or my 20s. I don't want to talk about it because of the way it was used. So it brings up some type of emotion. And then mentally we go, well, I guess I could kind of get some things in there. But really what we're talking about in metaphysics, when we're looking at the passages, we can see the physical. We're going to do the woman at the well in a little bit. We can say one was in she was a Samaritan woman in this section of, the physical location compared to, say, Judea, right? We have certain emotions attached to it, her mental state. But what is Jesus's message to her? Was to go in and look at their spiritual lesson that I'm trying to teach you, right? So go in, what is your gut telling you? What is your intuition telling you? What is spirit telling you? And so when you look at your own physical definition of the passage, then the passage is, okay, I'm going to get beyond this physical by doing the definitions, but really going within and saying, what is spirit trying to tell me here? And the reality is that we are all of these levels. At any given time, we move back and forth through the levels, but we are always divine, right? That divine nature that we see as universal law, spirit, universe, whatever you want to call it, we are divine beings first. So anyway, I like that little pyramid. Okay. We are evolving we are, it sounds funny, but we are evolving spiritual awareness. Your spiritual awareness is evolving. And I think you can look back and say, I felt this one way, and 10 years later, I'm this. 10 years later, I believe this now. And Unity does a great job, especially CCU, is saying the unfolding of the soul, the rose, even the symbol of the rose, and the unfolding, evolving spiritual awareness that we're just trying to become more conscious of. It's the unfoldment of divine nature from our consciousness. Okay. There's a word that we use. I don't know if you've heard it. If you've been around Unity, you may hear this word. If you haven't, you may hear this word. Whenever I heard this word in the very beginning, I was like, what are you talking about? And that is chemicalization. So when the awareness of new spiritual truths meet the old beliefs, sometimes it can show up as a physical, emotional, or mental reaction or symptom. Okay, so if you were raised like I was with a stronger Baptist background, that I won a contest when I was 12 because I brought the most people to church that day, an evangelical Southern Baptist background. And when I tied, because it was me and this other girl that was going to win something, the tiebreaker was to recite the books of the Bible. And I won. Okay. You can say that I was dunked in water. I was baptized, in front of the congregation in a tank and everything. So when I, in my later 20s, came into Unity, I was like, what? What are you talking about? I'm not holding hands at the end of the service and singing the peace song. What? And it took some time to kind of let go of the old beliefs of the Christian change and it took some time, and I went through emotional questioning and and it's all good. And I even remember one time that I was at a prayer chaplain training and we were doing some type of work to open ourselves up into, to others in prayer. And I don't recall what it was that was, it was like a sacred circle or something. I got physically sick that night to where I had to go home. And it was more a reaction to, all I can describe it as like a cleansing, like, wow, I can let go of everything I believed in, and a prayer took on a new meaning for me. So just be aware that as you come aware of when you're doing the metaphysical passages, like you may have some reaction to it, and that's okay. So they use a fancy word about chemicalization. Bottom line is you might have a reaction to it. Would anybody else like to share a little bit if that's happened to them? If that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or questions about that. Okay, so just know that if you read something and you go, I can't get it, put it away, go on to
Mhm.
something else. Or you read something and it clicks and you just go through a couple days of, wow, now what do I do? Letting go of those old beliefs and frameworks. That's okay too. It's just part of the process, part of the divine nature unfolding and becoming more aware. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Well, we're going to have a discuss it. Let's discuss it a little bit. Would anyone, let's go back to that. Does anybody like to share your understanding of what an involved spiritual awareness would be at this point in time? If you were to define that for yourself.
For me, it's a connection with everything.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that connection. I feel that we are all one. We are all together in
Mhm.
this. And
Yeah.
it's- mhm.
To me, it's it's ever changing, and
Mhm.
it's never complete. It's just ongoing, and
Mhm.
so different things come up at different times, and different awarenesses become more apparent at different times. And then sometimes those same awarenesses you're reminded of again and again and again,
Mhm. Mhm.
as you need to be. But it's not stagnant. It's just ever changing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, in unity, we say in God, we live, we move, we have our being, and said that for years. But it wasn't really until maybe even last year that it really gelled for me. Then it's really talking about with the allness.
Mhm.
And whatever I look at, whether it's the trees, the a lizard, a flower, it's all of it. It's all, I move in God, I walk in God, I have my being in God. Whatever I do, I'm doing it in God. While I'm sitting right here, I am sitting in God. And
Mhm.
that's how, it kind of like came to me.
Mhm.
So that was a really major shift for me to understand that whatever I look upon, I'm looking at the face of God, the allness of God.
Great. I love that. Yes. Yeah. So, with that being said, what does it mean to be born again? What do you think it means to be born again?
I think it's a shift in perception.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So when those traditionalists say, are you born again? Yes.
And again and again
And again and again and again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's one that I think I have to look at metaphysically because I get kind of itchy.
Yeah. It does. It does. It brings up some of that emotional part. Mhm. But intuition and intuitively and spiritually, we're born again every day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
when we wake up.
mhm. So we can let that go.
I'm gonna
All
let
right.
today go.
Okay. Yes, let today go. Be
Let
born
today
again.
go.
You know, sometimes I have to be born again every hour, so it depends on my day. All right, so let's have fun with the passage. Charles Fillmore, right? Remember, he discerned the meaning of the scripture by combining the Hebrew and the Greek names, looking at the definition of the names. So if you're wondering how he came up with all these definitions, he did the research and then took it to prayer. And this is his using practical clues within the Bible. This was his interpretation. I thought you would enjoy some of the metaphysical Bible terms that we use in Unity. Don should be very familiar with these. But you know, it's good to understand Unity's perspective. You don't hear us, I mean, once a year might talk about the crucifixion, but metaphysically, what does that mean? It's releasing limitations, letting go. Error thinking is it's on the next slide, but when Unity says the word sin is just a thinking and error. Okay, so error thinking, we're letting go of our personality to a more unfolding of more spiritual potential. You already said born again was like the reawakening of spiritual truth. And it can happen at any given time all day long. It's just this continued understanding of the spiritual truth. Resurrection, rising to Christ consciousness, that we lift up the whole person into Christ consciousness, even yourself, starting with yourself, that I resurrect myself, if you will, by rising to my Christ consciousness. Regeneration, a change in spiritual life, is incorporated into the body. A second coming, arriving at the awareness of one's own divinity, the Christ within. So the Jews, there are Jews that thought that Jesus was the Messiah, the promised one, the one that came, and that some people believe, without getting too much into Bible history, that when he died on the cross, he could not have been the Messiah. So therefore, there's going to be a second coming. So we can have that metaphysically when we just are under the awareness of our own divinity. So when I was more into the Baptist framework, and then I went into the unity framework, okay, I became aware of the Christ within. It was a resurrection in a way, and a second coming of Christ in me. Now I'm talking personally in me. And salvation, claiming our God-given attributes. I won't read that whole thing, but the restitution of humanity to our spiritual birthright. Okay, just some definitions. And you know the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. In unity, we say mind, idea, expression. The devil, metaphysically, conflict with truth. All thoughts that fight against or are adverse to truth, averse to truth. And then sin, just basically missing the mark. You fell short of the perfection, divine perfection, error thinking, negation of ideas. This is how we would interpret sin.
Interesting.
I'm going to leave it there for a second. Let that kind of sink in.
Yeah.
I wish I put them all at the same time, but let me pop back to the other screen for just a second, just to look at the words. And back to here. Any words jumping out or something, an idea jumping out at anybody that they'd like to share?
growing up in the Catholic Church, 12 years Catholic schooling and all. Of course, we have the confessional and, you know, the sin.
Yeah.
Forgive me, Father, I missed the mark. No, sorry.
There you go.
Well, we didn't say that.
No, I know.
Yeah, right.
But no, that does. It's
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
great way to look at it.
yeah. When I first came to Unity, and because I'm also from a Catholic background, and of course sin. I mean, you know, like you're a sinner, you know, and it weighs on you. You carry that. We're like, oh my God. So I am now at Unity. The first time that the pastor, I heard him define sin as missing the mark, error thinking. I was like, whoa, that was so liberating for me. I was like, that's it. I was like, it was just a mistake I made, you know, and it was just like, oh, poof, you know, such a big weight lifted.
Yes,
It's heavy. It's a heavy word.
it is. And for me personally, again, coming up through Southern Baptist background, it was a separation. It played into the idea that somehow I was separate from God because I didn't make the mark. I couldn't get up there. So missing the mark, falling short, you know, of course we believe we are not separate from God. When I was able to just take that one word and change what I hear to when I hear the word and go, oh, well, all right, I yelled at the guy in the I-4 traffic. Fell short there. Yeah, you know, that doesn't mean I'm separate from God. That just means I'm human, you know, but it's all part of the whole process. So.
Yeah, and I just want to add that, you know, being raised Catholic, you're instilled with these very strong definitions of what sin is and what heaven is and what, you know, hell is and the devil and Satan and all that. And then when you try to do this and look at other meanings for these words, it's really hard to let go of those definitions that were given to you so strongly in your youth. And one of the things that helped me let go of those definitions was to learn about the culture of the time when the Bible was written and when Jesus lived in his background. And Jesus was Jewish. He was raised in the, you know, first century Judaism. And in the Jewish tradition, there really isn't the concept of heaven or hell or devil that we associate with the Bible today. So when Jesus, or you see in the Bible, when people are talking about references to heaven and to hell and to Satan and the devil and all this, it doesn't have the meaning that we would associate with it now, because he didn't have, Jesus and the writers of the Bible didn't have those in their culture. They didn't have those meanings. So you have to look at what were they really saying and what would have meant to them when they used those terms, because heaven and hell doesn't exist in Judaism. They don't strive for an afterlife, and the devil wasn't necessarily a person outside
Right.
that exists, you know, have an influence on their lives. So, you know, in that context, it was a little bit easier for me to go, okay, I can let go of those original definitions of those words and look for what they really might mean to me, because they never were intended at the time they were written to mean what I think they are.
You think,
Thank you.
do you think that I'm not Catholic, but do you, when Don is saying what, and the other person was saying, talking about the Catholic Church, do you think maybe that was just created by man and not really stipulated in the Bible or something? I mean, was that when the Roman Catholic Church started? I mean, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. I'm just asking if that what occurred in order for that to be so making you feel guilty about dealing with these words and stuff. Because I don't know. I'm not, wasn't raised Catholic or anything like that, but,
Right.
and stuff, but I'm just wondering if, it sounds to me it is more created by man than by Jesus.
Mhm.
Yeah, one of the reasons that you want to do your own metaphysical interpretation of the Bible to find out what it means to you is
Right.
because the majority of religious dogma that you're going to get through regular religions is someone else's interpretation of what it meant to them.
Right.
And that might not necessarily mean what it means to you. And all of us, why is their definition of what it meant to them
No, I understand.
the end all?
Yeah.
And yeah, there were like the concept of original sin that you'll have a lot that has in the Catholic faith and a lot of other Christian faiths. Original sin, you have to be baptized to get rid of original sin.
Right.
You're not going to find original sin in the Bible.
No.
It
No.
doesn't. That came hundreds of years later. So
Okay.
you know,
Mhm.
there's
That's what I'm
a
asking.
lot that is man's interpretation of what they thought they were reading in the Bible, and then interpretation of what someone else interpreted out of the Bible too. So this is Charles Fillmore going, let's go back to the beginning. Let's look what they really meant and how do I apply it to my life? Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And so you also have, obviously the New Testament, which is Christianity. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
Mhm.
And each of those writers, and you can look this up on your own, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were all writing to a different audience at the
Mhm.
time. So Matthew more to the Jewish people. Acts and John is more to non-Jewish. You're really seeing in John, the resurrection focus, and so you have to kind of look at, well, who was their audience and what were they trying to establish at the time? And
Right.
so then you start going into the whole, there's a heaven, hell, there's a power difference, there's a structure difference. So yeah. And it's important. The reason I want to put these terms out here is because these are the terms that tend to hang people up when they get to the passage. If you had some kind of experience with, like Don was saying, being raised Catholic, and the word sin and devil is so ingrained, as you're reading a certain passage, if that word sin is put into that passage, for some people, that's a stop. They automatically kind of stop there.
Mhm.
And it's hard for them to move beyond what they're reading on the paper. And that's part of the whole process of the evolving awareness. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other comments on these words?
When you say a verse, when you say in the section that says devil and towards the end, all thoughts that fight again, what do you mean by a verse? I guess I don't know the definition of a verse to truth. What does that mean?
So that would be an internal thing, like your, truth being capital T, God, spirit,
Okay.
truth, and just that conflict, that fight. And actually, you're going to see a little bit of that fight in the woman of the well story, because she can't get beyond the physical until she can get beyond the physical means of what she's talking about. She can't get to what her truth is, essentially.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's kind of like an adversary. So if
Okay.
you look at it like that, I mean, we're our own worst adversaries sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Mhm.
oh, I did great today. No, you didn't. No, I did great. No, you didn't do that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. We're our worst enemy.
We are. And that's that little thing, there's devil sitting on the shoulder, they would say. And it's like, no, it's just accepting that I'm growing as a person. I learned from this. So anybody else? Great questions. All right. So just a reminder, so what we did for steps, if you will, for interpreting the Bible metaphysically, choose the passage you want to interpret. Read it once, noting key words. So read it through. Write down the nouns in one column. Some nouns you'll use, some you won't. And I also write down like if there's a little phrase maybe in there that's kind of 2 words, that's fine too. Look up the meaning of the words metaphysically and write them down in the right column. And then take it to prayer. Just let it sit and read it through. And then read it again if you have to. Read the right column through as sentences. Because as you do that, the meaning's going to fall out for you. It's just going to appear. It'll help you kind of get to what you think the passage is. And then track your Christ nature. Does that work for you? And again, the great part is you could interpret the passage today and then come back a month from now, interpret it a little bit differently the next time you read it. Okay, there's no right or wrong answer. All right, so last week we did in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this is just what I showed you. The nouns are on the left, the definitions on the right. And we said, or for me, it became, God, the energy in all things is in us. And through Christ consciousness, our divine ideas are manifested. So let's look at the woman of the well. It's a little bit longer. This isn't the entire story, but would someone like to read these passages? Because this is what we're going to do. Passages 7 through 13. Somebody want to volunteer to read that?
1 through 13.
I will if you don't.
Okay. All right, I'll read.
Okay.
All right. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Because Jews did not associate with Samaritans. So anyway, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life."
And you can, and later in the past, it's a longer story. She goes back to the village and, etc. But she says, "I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." So it's interesting if you know a little bit about the background of the time, like John was saying, the Samaritans were also Jews. So a lot of people, when they first hear this story or when it's presented, you don't hear that part.
No, I did not know.
Yes, they were a Jewish sect they were Jews as well. There were a lot of Jewish sects at the time, and SECTS, just make sure if it doesn't come across the headphones the way I wanted to. There's a lot of different groups, and Jesus's group of Jews did not tend to go into Samaria or cross this particular area. So when she says, "You are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman," she's a Jew as well, but they just did not associate together. So the first thing that's happening here is that the disciples and he decide to go across this particular way. And of course, if the Jacob and Jacob's well. This is on Samaritan territory. Okay, so Jesus would know about Jacob's well as well. And then you add in, a lot of people focus on this particular story, the fact that he's talking to a woman. Women tended to go to the well on their own with a large vase to draw water from it, and typically at noon. So the fact that she's there is not that big a deal. It's more he's there and surprises her. Okay, so if you're looking at this passage, and I think if things don't kind of start to fall into place a little bit of what he's talking about versus what she's talking about, then you can go back through and just start underlining those words that that kind of pop out at you. Okay, so I underlined Samaritan woman, water, Jesus, Jew, gift of God, Jacob. You may underline something else, but let's just go with those words for right now. Okay, so I set up my chart and say, well, Samaria, Samaria, the woman, Jesus, Jews, Jacob's well, water, Messiah, gifts of God. This is what popped out at me when I read the passage. Okay.
Okay, I'm getting it.
Okay. What pops out at you? This is what popped out at me. So then I go to the metaphysical. Again, you're not interpreting anything right now. You're just writing things, the definitions down. This is what Charles says that these represent: mixed thoughts, partly worldly, partly religious, intellectual perceptions, truth, and without understanding. The soul nature, women represent the soul nature, the psyche or soul nature. Jesus, the I am. Jews represent divine ideas or spiritual consciousness. Jacob's well represents inspiration through the intellect. Water is a cleansing of materials, life, and energy. The Messiah was the promise. And gifts of God in the Bible are labeled love, essence, transformation. So you could look at that and say, I don't have any idea what he's talking about.
Mhm.
But that's okay, because you just look at the definitions. And then you kind of read through it, saying sentences, mixed thoughts, partly worldly, truth without understanding, the soul nature, I am, divine idea, and spiritual consciousness, inspiration through intellects, cleansing, the promise, love, essence, transformation. And take that to prayer. Sometimes this is going to take, it's not going to be an automatic thing. It might take a day or two. Like I said, just let it sit. I imagine that most of you, when you read the story, were starting to see some of the things already starting to kind of come out. Her versus him, what she's talking about versus what she's talking about, the actual water. He's talking about what?
Everlasting.
Everlasting life. He's talking about life and energy. He's not talking about the physical water. Okay. So if you looked at that passage, you might have come up already with your own thing. But if I look at the passage, what I get is that as we go through life, sometimes we struggle with both the material and spiritual truths. She's struggling right now. She can only see the material part. You didn't bring a vessel with you. This is our well. Why are you talking to me? Where is your vessel to draw from this well? What do you mean I'm going to be thirsty again? Where he's talking about, if you knew who I was, you would drink the water that I offer, or the life that I offer. It's not actual, you're going to be thirsty again. You know, he's not talking about the physical part. So in our lives, we tend to sometimes get to where it's a struggle, material and spiritual things come in conflict sometimes. However, through our soul, we can access the I am and be open to spiritual ideas and inspiration. See how I'm putting the sentences together to make it a meaning? By shifting away from materials goods, we have unlimited potential. So what you don't see in this passage is she goes, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell the village about what you just said. And then later she brings all the village with her and he talks to them. But then that last sentence he says in there about the Messiah part, well, we have a limited potential. You're thinking you're limited to just the water. You will thirst again if you're just talking about the water, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about unlimited potential and God's promise, love, life essence, and transformation. So if we go back to this story, I'm going to back up a second. She came to the water. Will you give me a drink? His disciples aren't around. What are you talking about? You're not even supposed to be talking to me. How can you ask me for a drink? If you knew the gift of God who asked you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. If you knew who you were talking to, I would give you living water. You would understand that you have unlimited potential, the living water. But wait, you don't have anything to put your water in. There's nothing to draw from in the well. It's deep. So where do I get this living water? What are you talking about? I have the water that's right here that has been in my family and tradition. And, Jacob, he drank from here and all his sons and all his livestock. What are you talking about? She's clearly focused on the physical well and the physical part of it. And then he says, well, everyone who drinks from this well, they're going to be thirsty again because he is talking about the spiritual side. Whoever drinks the water I will give them will never thirst. In fact, you're going to have eternal life. You have it now. It's God's promises to you. Okay. Oops, let me go back. Went the wrong way. And that's essentially the women at the well, if you're looking at it from a metaphysical perspective. Okay. Thoughts? That's a longer passage. They take a little bit more time than say, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. This one takes a little bit longer. Anybody else come up with what this story means to them without having to write this down? Or anything that speaks to you? I'm going to stop sharing so I can see your faces. Oh, Vicky and Luz don't have their cameras on. No, just kidding.
They were eating.
Any thoughts on the woman at the well? How many people have heard that story before? Raise your hand. The actual story out of the Bible. Okay.
I've read it many times and sort of had an inkling of what you just explained, although not to the same depth.
Yeah. Like I know there's a more deeper meaning here.
And some of those bigger passages too, just as a hint, when you're trying to do that, once you've got the definitions, sometimes to make sentences out of it, if you go pull the verbs out of the passage too, where if, for example, it's that the Samaritan woman, like if she brings water, then it's what does Samaritan woman mean and what does water mean? So put that together, like this divine idea brings this, and it kind of helps you string the ideas together. So you can pull the verbs out to make those sentences from the story, which will help you kind of get an idea of what exactly they're trying to say.
Mhm.
That helps too sometimes.
Mhm.
I can't honestly imagine what else it would mean or why it would be there if it wasn't what we just talked about. You know, like why
Mhm.
we included just it seems really random otherwise, you know, and it doesn't make any sense. Just I don't know. I don't know how anybody else would interpret it.
Mhm. Why
Exactly.
include that story?
Yeah, why?
Mhm. Anybody else thoughts about even the interpretation, the process? I was just looking at something real quick. So I just wanted to look at something and just go back to what we were talking about earlier. Let me go back to the woman, or the story that, oh, come on. I had an idea. If you look at that last line, I know the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. This is in John. So John is writing to the audience of not, John is writing more to Gentiles, not Jews. And in John's gospel, it is about setting Jesus up as the Messiah. So this is why this story may have been included, because there's some stories that are in all four gospels. They're in only two of them. When I say gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, there's little variations of them. So if you keep that in mind too, it can kind of help you when you have that background knowledge, when you have somebody talking to you about the story that maybe they see it from a different perspective, like Lutz was saying earlier. So just keep that in mind too. So here we have Jesus being set up as the Messiah that's going to come again that can give you eternal life versus God or spirit. And go back through here. Any other thoughts? Do you want to see the definitions? Okay. Have you ever seen a time in your life when this might have happened where maybe you were more focused on material versus spiritual truths? So I'm going to say that I'm going to go forward because this is just the summary because I want to make a comment about something. I want to see something. How many of you are new to Unity? I mean, I know some of you, but fairly new to Unity. Okay. So in the beginning, what I hear, I'll speak from my perspective, but it's pretty common that a lot of people hear about the affirmation, the affirming, the manifestation, prosperity, that if I affirm that this is going to happen, I'm going to get the job, I'm going to have more financial stability, I'm going to, there's this beginning practice of affirming that we want these things in our lives, right? And so in the beginning, as you start to practice some of these principles, it is, to me, if you look at the woman at the well story, a focus on material. And you're learning about the spiritual truths that like kind of back up that material things. This is how the spirit works. This is how, and really what's happening is you're kind of creating this muscle memory in a way. You're kind of creating these practices. So when I say you are a metaphysician or you are a practicing metaphysician, you're affirming, then the spirit kind of comes in underneath that. And what you don't realize, all one day it just kind of dawns on you. It's like, oh God, it's all God. Like Marlene was saying, it's like, oh, I'm not using this to get this, because there's a lot of people out there that believe that's what unity is about. I can make, and if you ever saw the movie The Secret or anything like that, I can do this to get this, right? But we kind of learn as baby steps. Getting to the practice of saying this affirmation, affirmative prayer, which a lot of people aren't raised to do that. So we get to the affirmative prayer, and as we do that, then we realize, oh, Spirit's been working in our lives all along.
Mhm.
I just never realized that the water was there,
Mhm.
right? I never realized it. I was focused on the glass or the vessel.
Right.
So any other thoughts about that? I'd be interested to hear some of the people that are just starting out, or just, your perspective, and if that helps you in any way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I think, again, for myself, I can only speak for myself, but as I am getting older, I think I just, this concept just makes sense to me. And, all the materialistic things that, you're going for and all this, and with your work, with your careers, with everything going on, and you forget about just living,
Yeah.
when I was younger, I was very active in a lot of things, and in that middle ground area between the 40s, 30, 40s, I kind of slowed down a lot. Now I'm like, oh, I just have so much life. I just want to get out there and do it. And drag my 34-year-old daughter with me, and she's like, oh, okay. So but the thing is that this is a beautiful place that we're in, and our life. And to just take it all in, enjoy it, live every day to the fullest, the old saying, and that's
Right.
what it means to me, and that's where I'm coming.
Great. Thank you. So our series was called Lost in Translation. Curious to see how you think that applies to what we learned tonight and the lessons you've been hearing. And I hope next week you can join Shannon and about some of the hymns and stuff. How do you think that applies? This will be our final wrap up and comments, and I don't want to say too much. How does that apply to what you've learned over the last 2 weeks?
Lost in translation.
Hmm?
I'm just trying to think it out, and looking at it from a different point of view, and growing from it, and being open-minded to all the changes that you from reading it and interpreting it. It's all personal. And as an individual, looking at this and everything else, as a person looking at this and stuff, you're like, I remember these things from a different point of view, but there have been certain aha moments where, like, oh, so that's what that means. And so I guess the translation, Lost in Translation, is like an aha moment for me, and everything, and stuff. So it's learning something new to be able to get a bigger perspective on who I am and what God has in store for me.
Great.
I think.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? I'll go. If I step back and look at that bigger picture, like pull away, I don't think I got this idea that the Bible and the stories is individualized, means something different. It can be a living document, as I say. I got the idea that I had to believe it a certain way when I was taught or ministered to, or my upbringing, whatever it may be, that the messages were not translated the way that I translate it now. So I think it got lost that somehow this was a bad thing, or the messages of love and peace and harmony and oneness, and that was lost for me for a long time until I came into unity. And then I could look at it and step back and say, oh, that's what he meant. That's what this meant. Like you just said, that's what we mean by love of, humanity, if you will, or that we're one, or there's one spirit and one power. So it's a little bit about me. Anybody else?
I think that too. I mean, I think the metaphysical interpretation makes it, to me, the living word, where I think it was before, was it Vega who said it was a weapon? I mean, I grew up with it as a weapon for how you should behave and how you better not behave.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and historically, if you just took it historically, personally, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting to me if it's just. But I mean, I was never that big of a historian, so just
Mhm.
hearing these stories, like this happened or that happened, it's like, okay. So it being metaphysical really makes it living. Why we're still talking about it, why it's still important, why we still live in that dynamic, as human beings, as our relationship to spirit or to God.
Mhm. Yeah, that was great. Nice. Mhm.
Well, I think for me, the Bible, um, early on when I was reading it, even as a teenager and a kid, um, the historical stories were very hard to understand.
Mhm.
So the Bible, to me, it was lost in translation for much of my life. And until I started seeing it from the metaphysical perspective in unity, then it became a different document entirely.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm discovering.
Mhm.
So now I have more interest in even looking at it again, and just for the purpose of trying to find more meaning from anything, actually, just
Right.
looking at it altogether differently.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. Anybody else? So, as you start to explore, there's I have to say that, too, to keep in mind, this is fascinating. If you kind of look at it like this is not just the unfoldment, as Charles was saying, like the unfolding of the human soul, or the unfolding of humanity. It is the story of a people and their genealogy. And so, as you get into some of the Old Testament, if you look at Old Testament stories, like some of the women, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, names that you've heard before, and you read those things and their stories, just keep in mind that if there's a character, or, whether male or female, that you identify with, you can apply the spiritual qualities to that person. It doesn't have to be, you know, a real quick example, Rahab has been written as a prostitute or a harlot, right? So, but she saves her entire family. Whether or not it was changed, we don't know, right? But she negotiates with oh, I think it's Joshua. She negotiates with him to save her family because he's about to destroy the city. So can you fault her for being protective, for being standing upright, to being coming, you know, a power, a strength? So in each of these characters, think of too, as you read through the story and you're metaphysically interpreting them, maybe you relate to a person, and what is that person trying to demonstrate? And what is that quality that that person demonstrates? So that's another way to look at the stories too. Okay. Well, it's been great, a pleasure, and I enjoy this. And we have to do this more often. I think we need like a maybe we'll have to talk to Reverend Dawn and Reverend Maggie to get something going consistently. But I hope you enjoyed the class. I've enjoyed getting you, meeting you. I know some of you already, but meeting some of you and getting to know you better. Have fun with it, you know, and have fun with it. And it's okay. One day it makes sense, one day it doesn't. It doesn't really matter. It's between you and spirit. So with that, bless you. I appreciate you, and I'll see you on a Sunday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Enjoy your week. Thank you.
All
You
right.
too. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Faith.
you.
You're welcome.
Night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good
Bye-bye.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.